Welcome to the 12th part of the Blender 2.8 Beginners Tutorial series. In this video we will pick a nice camera perspective and then we will assemble the scene. That means we will place all the objects we have created before nicely in our scene. And then we will fill the bowl with apples using a rigid body simulation. As always, you can find the timestamps in the video description below, and if you want to follow along, sign up to our resource section free of charge, where you can download all the textures, blend files and videos for this tutorial series and our handy Blender 2.8 shortcut PDF. Hi everyone, Zach here for cgboost.com and let's get started. Alright, in order to assemble our nice scene, we need to know from what camera perspective we will view our scene in the end, so from where we want to take the picture basically, and that we will do using a camera. So let's unhide this camera object up here. Let's zoom back a bit. Here it is. You can see this little triangle up here describes where the top of the camera is. And if you don't have a camera in your scene anymore, simply hit Shift A and add a simple camera object here. In order to view the scene from the camera perspective, simply click on this button here. You can also move out of the camera by clicking this button, or you press 0 on the numpad. When you are in the camera, you can also press the middle mouse button and start rotating. You can see then you will automatically switch out of camera view again. So if I switch into the camera view, we can scroll our mouse wheel to zoom in and out, and we can press the home button to set the camera to full screen. If you don't have a home button, you can click on view and click on frame all. So in order to move a camera is basically just a 3D object as everything else. So we can use the transform tools here. For example, we can move this around, but we can also move into the camera. And since this is still selected, I can simply press G for moving and then also lock this, for example, along the Z axis or the Y or the X axis. Then we can press N, go to view and lock the camera to view. This only works when you are inside the camera view. So if I click on that and now simply use my default navigation tools with middle mouse button, I can rotate. I can now also select other objects and rotate around them. And you can see that my camera will now always stick to my view. But if you don't like that, there's also another way to do it. Let's select the camera once again, then click on view, navigation and click on walk navigation. Now you can see this little cross in the center of the camera. Now with my mouse I can look around, and if you look at the status bar below, you can see a lot of shortcuts which you can press to move this camera. For example, with W you can move forward, with S backwards, A left, D right, E up and Q down. And if I press W to move forward and look around in my scene, I basically can navigate to this spot where I'm looking at. If you scroll the mouse wheel forward, the whole thing gets faster, and if you scroll it backwards, it's getting slower. So and in this way you can basically move around and pick a nice camera perspective. It probably takes a while to get used to this, but when you're done you can simply press left click or enter to confirm this new position. So here I want to mention assembling a scene can take a while when you're moving objects around until everything fits. I certainly played around a lot with this scene already until I had something which I like, so I want to make this video as short as possible, and that's why I don't want to fiddle around so much. So I just know exactly where I want to place everything. So the camera I want to place somewhere here. We can change the camera perspective later on and tweak it a bit until everything fits perfectly, but just for the beginning we need something to start with. So I want to have it here somewhere so I can place the knife and the cutted apple onto the fabric part here. So the whole thing makes sense to have it here. And certainly I want to place some apples in the bowl here and also a few apples around here to populate the scene a bit more. So now it's not so nice to always switch between camera view and this view to move objects around. So what I recommend, let's move the mouse to the top right corner here, but still inside of the 3D view. Now this little cross appears, and if you now left click and hold and move this into the frame, you can see we can split the window. It's basically a faster way to split the window than right click here and click on split area. If you want to remove such a window, you can also again go into the corner until the little cross appears, left click and hold and move this across the frame of the editor. Release your mouse and then this is gone. So let's duplicate the view, press here numpad 0 Press T to hide the tool shelf, press the home button for full screen view. And there's one thing I don't like. We can see what's inside the frame, but we can also see a little bit what's outside of the frame of the camera. And I think this can be confusing because you somehow have the feel that the image you will have in the end is much bigger. So what I recommend is to select the camera, go to the camera settings down here. Then let's go to viewport display, open Passport 2 and set the opacity to 1. Now we can only see what's inside the final image, what we will render out from this 3D scene. So if you like, you can even hide the gizmos and the viewport overlays. Make this maybe a little bit smaller. Press the home button once again. And now we can start over here to move these objects around. So first of all, let's start with the cut apple. I want to have someone is placed somewhere here and someone over here. You can see that I'm just moving them around, pressing G, and for rotating I use the free rotation tool by pressing R twice. So double R, and then you can freely rotate this, which sometimes helps a lot to quickly get to the rotation I want. So, and I'm working a little bit with guiding lines here. What this means I will tell you in a second. Let's move this up here just a bit. So, and when working with a creative 3D scene, let's call it that way, it doesn't matter if these objects intersect a little bit, because in the final frame you can't see it anyway. So something like that. Now let's take the knife, and I played around with the knife a lot where I can place this, but I decided to place it like this. I rotate this, press R, X, 90 degrees, negative. Currently I'm using the local axis for rotation and moving around. So if you have global here enabled, then you might press X twice to have the local axis from the object after enabling the rotation tool. So let's move it somewhere here. And when assembling a scene, it's always a little bit about storytelling. And certainly we don't have much going on in this scene, but we still can use the position of the objects to tell a little bit of a story or to guide our viewers. For example, the knife down here certainly interacts with these two apples. And these two apples, as you can see over here, are rotated towards the knife. So they basically show into the knife's direction. So all of these objects are interacting with each other. So it's very simple, but it works. So, and the reason why I place the knife over here is simply because I wanted to see the nice details we have here. This little beveled edge we will see in the final image, and this will make the knife look really realistic. And that's why I show it from this perspective. Then let's quickly select the fabric here. And since this is hovering a bit above the ground, let's press G, Z and move it a little bit downwards. I hold down Shift so I can slowly move this. So I take care that I don't go too far, just a little bit, so it's a bit closer to the ground. And then we can also move the knife a bit closer here, something like that. So later on we will add more apples here, but now let's place some apples around the scene, because when you imagine the final image you have a lot of apples here and some of them here. These spaces on both sides are very empty, and we will frame the main subject here, which is basically the whole scene, but I think the main subject is the cutted apple and the knife. And to frame this area a bit better, let's add a few apples around here to also give a little bit more context. So basically first we had the apples here in the bowl, and then they were moved out and then cut in half. It's very simple storytelling, but I think this still works here in this very simple scene. So I make use of this little fold here, because if I now place the apple like this, we have a nice top view here onto the apple, maybe not too much. And it looks like this apple is interacting with the fabric here. Maybe let's rotate this a bit so that the leaf is pointing to the other direction, something like that. But yeah, in the final image, when we have the lighting and everything set, we can still move these objects around to have the perfect look. So now I want to duplicate the apple. First of all, if you want to duplicate this with the leaf, certainly you have to select both and then Shift and D duplicate this. But certainly not every apple here in the scene should have this leaf. So in this case, I just duplicate this without the leaf by simply selecting the apple. And I use another trick. When you duplicate an object here in Blender with Shift and D, in the background, Blender creates two mesh informations. That means the file size will be bigger. However, when you have objects which are basically looking exactly the same, you can duplicate an object using Alt D. if I do that, then these two objects are linked to each other. So in the background, they are basically just using one mesh information, and here it shows up as two objects. You can better understand this over here, for example. You can see we are using the mesh which is called sphere 001. And if I open the other one, you can see it's using the exact same mesh information. So if I duplicate this apple, Shift and D, you can see that this is now called sphere 004. So this is a new mesh information which was added to the blend file. So let's undo this. So and the cool thing is, now these two objects are linked. That means the blend file will be smaller, and if I tap into edit mode and edit something, you can see it will be edited on both objects, since we are basically just editing this one mesh information which is stored inside of the blend file and which is linked to two objects here. So, and this I will do for all the apples here. We will rotate them just a little bit, and then you won't notice that much that they all look basically the same. So now let's place two apples here, one on this side. And with Alt D, I duplicate this to the other side. And as you can see, I play around with the rotation of the apples because I don't want to have them all show in the exact same direction and have the exact same rotation, so that everything looks a bit more organic and natural here. Alright, now we want to add a bunch of apples to the bowl, and certainly we just can duplicate this here and place it over here, but then the apples will intersect, which is not a big problem because we only will view the scene from one perspective. But wouldn't it be cool to fill the bowl here quickly by throwing the apples inside? And something like this is actually possible. So first of all, let's go over to the animation workspace. Let's hide one of the 3D views over here. We can leave the solid viewport shading enabled if we like. And now I want to create a quick rigid body simulation. And actually this is not that complicated. First of all, I want to create a boundary so that no apple is falling outside of the bowl. And first of all, let's select the bowl, right click, click on snap and click on cursor to selected. Now the cursor is in the center of the bowl here. Now let's hit Shift A and add a mesh and a cylinder. So, and now you might ask, oh my God, what's going on here? And I can tell you, this is basically a little problem we have with the new collection system. So let's move this down here a bit. And as you can see, the new cylinder were automatically added to the selected collection. As you can see over here, this collection is selected and the cylinder were added here. And this is a collection we were using on the apples for the particle system. If I go to the render settings, you can see this collection was used here. And every object you add here to the drops basically will also be displayed on the position of the apples. So what we need to do is to simply drag and drop this cylinder out of this collection. Let's delete this cylinder once again. And in order to not add this to this collection, we simply select this collection up here. Hit Shift A, go to Mesh and add a cylinder. Now you can see this was added over here, and since this is not connected to any particle system, we now have this cylinder. Now let's open up the operator panel down here, and I don't want to have a cap here on the top and on the bottom, so let's set the cap fill type to nothing. Let's reduce the radius to 15 centimeters and the depth to something like 50 centimeters. If you like, you can move it up a bit. So now the cylinder is basically covering all the space here, and I want to see what's going on inside. So let's select the cylinder, go to the Object tab, go to Viewport Display and set the display as to wire. Now this object will be displayed as wire, similar as if we go to the wireframe view over here, but now this is restricted to this one object only. And now in order to make the physics work, we basically have to tell Blender what object should play what role in the simulation. So let's select the cylinder and go over to the Physics tab and let's add a rigid body. The rigid body settings are relatively simple. We have two types, the active and the passive. Passive basically means this is a static object which has collision on it, and active means this object is flying around as we need it for the apple later on. So this one here is passive. It is not animated, so if you create an animation with a passive object, you have to check this one here. And important, we have to set the collision shape from convex hull to the actual mesh. Because a convex hull is basically a mesh which is quickly generated around this one here, but it ignores holes. And since we have a hole up here, we need to set this to the mesh. So it uses the existing mesh here as collision object. Then to make the collision a bit more precise, let's go to sensitivity and reduce the margin to 0.01. So basically this is a little bit of gap which will be added between those two objects, so they don't actually meet each other completely. So now let's add a similar thing to the bowl. Let's select it, enable rigid body, passive collision shape set to mesh, and the margin to 0.01. So now let's use one apple here. Again, I use Alt-D instead of Shift-D to create a linked duplicate. Place it somewhere here. And before I add all the other apples, I add the rigid body. This should be active. Again, I want to use the mesh as collision object, and the margin again I set to 0.01. Now let's take a look from above and basically fill the bowl here. You can also rotate these around a bit so they have a random start point. And since I added this information first, all of these duplicates have this information now. So I don't need to add them to all these apples individually. So now let's select multiple, press Alt and D, and then move this to the top. Maybe rotate this a bit, and maybe let's do it once again. Let's put one to the top here. And in the end, we will just rotate them around, move them around, and delete apples if we have too many. So now we basically set up the whole simulation. And in order to play this, important, the blue pointer here needs to be at the first frame or frame 0. And then we play back the simulation. Don't worry that all these particles will stay up here. When we apply the new position later on, they will jump back to the apples. So I think let's make the size of the cylinder a bit smaller. Control A, apply the scale. Now I moved this pointer back here to start this from the beginning, and I think something like that looks okay to me. So what I do now, let's simply delete the cylinder. Let's select everything here. Go to Object, Rigid Body, and click on Apply Transform. That means the new position of the apples will be used as new default starting point for the simulation. So now the simulation is still active. That means if I move this around, the apples would still move around because this new position is just the new starting point for the simulation. So now we have to remove all the physics information. I leave everything selected, go again to Object, Rigid Body, and click on Remove. Now if I click on the apple, you can see no physics is enabled. If I click on the bowl, nothing is enabled. And now we can start placing this. For that, let's go back to Layout, because we need to see what's going on here in the final frame. This looks still a bit weird, but we have a lot of apples here in the bowl already, which was a good time saver. And now we still need to place some apples here in the center and position them nicely so that this looks nice from the camera perspective. So I will fast forward this a bit because I will basically just move these apples around, rotate them a bit so that this looks nice. All right, let's do it. So I think this is what I got here. Just take care that no apple is intersecting with the bowl too much or is somehow peeking through the bowl down here. It doesn't really matter if the apple are intersecting a bit with each other. In the end, it's just important that we can't see it from this perspective. So from this perspective, everything should look nice. So let's do one final thing. We have this leaf down here, but no leaf up here. And to have a nice balance in the scene, I will have one leaf here and one leaf over here. So let's select the leaf, press Alt and D, also link duplicate this too. This is still attached to this apple here, as you can see. So let's select this, right click, parent, and click on clear parent and keep transformation. If I just click on clear parent, it might happen that the leaf jumps to the original position it was where it was parented. So if I click on clear parent and keep transformation, it will be cleared and it will stay here in this spot. So now I move this to the other apple over here. So yeah, I think something like that looks nice. And now don't forget to save. yeah guys, now you know how to set up a camera, move it around in your scene to pick a nice perspective, and you know how to use the rigid body simulation, which can be used for many fun things. If you learned something from this video, make sure to give it a like, and if you want to get notified for future videos, subscribe to this channel and ring the bell underneath this video. When you enjoy our content here, you might also enjoy our Blender 2.8 Launchpad course, which is a comprehensive introduction into Blender 2.8, where you will learn all the basics of Blender in detail and how to create an animated car scene from scratch. If you want to learn more, check the link in the video description below. Thanks a lot for watching guys. Now check the next video where we will learn more about lighting in Blender. We will have a look at the different light objects. We will set up a nice lighting for our scene, and we will adjust some materials so that this fits better to our lighting and the scene, and we will adjust the leaf materials so that this is translucent, that the light can shine through it. So don't miss this one. I will see you there. Goodbye.